Jordan Peterson has built much of his public intellectual persona on his interpretation of great thinkers, with Friedrich Nietzsche being one of his most frequently cited philosophers. In countless lectures, interviews, and his best-selling books, Peterson presents himself as someone who has grappled seriously with Nietzsche's ideas and emerged with profound insights about human nature, morality, and the meaning of life. However, a careful examination of Peterson's understanding of Nietzsche reveals something far more troubling than simple misinterpretation. What we find is a systematic domestication of one of philosophy's most radical thinkers, a reduction of Nietzsche's revolutionary insights into banal self-help platitudes and conservative talking points. Peterson doesn't just misunderstand Nietzsche, he transforms him into his philosophical opposite. This analysis will demonstrate how Peterson's Nietzsche bears little resemblance to the actual philosopher, and how this misrepresentation serves Peterson's own ideological agenda while doing violence to genuine philosophical inquiry. Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, Overman or Superman, represents one of his most profound and challenging ideas. Far from being about individual self-improvement, the Übermensch is Nietzsche's vision of a type of human being who creates new values in the wake of traditional morality's collapse. As Nietzsche writes in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? The Overman is the meaning of the earth. Let your will say, the Overman shall be the meaning of the earth." The Übermensch is not achieved through following rules or hierarchies, but through the radical act of value creation, becoming a giver of names who establishes new meanings rather than inheriting old ones. This figure represents humanity's potential to transcend traditional moral categories entirely. Peterson consistently reduces this revolutionary concept to conventional self-improvement advice. In his lectures, he presents the Übermensch as someone who gets their life together, takes responsibility, and climbs the dominance hierarchy. This interpretation transforms Nietzsche's radical vision into something that would fit comfortably in a corporate trading seminar. Consider Peterson's frequent advice to clean your room as a step toward becoming an Übermensch. While personal responsibility isn't inherently wrong, this domestication completely misses Nietzsche's point. The Übermensch doesn't achieve greatness by conforming to existing standards of order and responsibility, they create entirely new standards. Peterson's Übermensch is essentially a really good middle manager, organized, responsible, and successful within existing systems. Nietzsche's Übermensch is a revolutionary figure who smashes existing systems and creates new ones. These are not merely different interpretations, they are philosophical opposites. When Nietzsche proclaimed, "God is dead," he wasn't lamenting a loss or issuing a warning about the dangers of atheism. He was diagnosing a cultural condition, the inevitable result of rational inquiry undermining traditional religious authority. The famous passage from The Gay Science makes this clear. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? This isn't a call to return to religious faith, but a recognition that we must now create meaning without divine guarantees. The death of God is both a liberation and a challenge. We are now free to create our own values, but we must also bear the full weight of that responsibility. Peterson treats Nietzsche's diagnosis as a problem to be solved rather than a condition to be embraced. In his lectures and writings, Peterson presents the death of God as a catastrophic loss that leads inevitably to nihilism, totalitarianism, and moral chaos. His solution? A return to traditional religious and mythological frameworks. This interpretation reveals Peterson's fundamental misunderstanding of Nietzsche's project. Where Nietzsche sees opportunity for new forms of meaning-making, Peterson sees only danger. Where Nietzsche calls for courage in the face of meaninglessness, Peterson calls for a retreat to familiar comforts. Peterson's Nietzsche is essentially a conservative Christian who got scared by his own insights and decided to stick with traditional values. The real Nietzsche would have viewed Peterson's approach as precisely the kind of intellectual cowardice he spent his career critiquing. Nietzsche's distinction between master and slave morality On the Genealogy of Morality is not a simple hierarchy of good and bad moral systems. It's a genealogical analysis of how different moral frameworks develop from different social positions and psychological needs. Master morality, according to Nietzsche, emerges from a position of strength and creates value spontaneously. Good is what the masters affirm about themselves, and bad is simply what is unlike them. Slave morality, by contrast, is reactive. It defines itself primarily in opposition to the masters, creating the categories of good and evil based on resentment. Crucially, Nietzsche doesn't simply endorse master morality over slave morality. He recognizes that both have contributed to human development, and his ultimate goal is to move beyond both towards something new. Peterson consistently misinterprets this distinction through his obsession with dominance hierarchies. In his framework, master morality becomes the morality of successful alpha males who have climbed the social ladder, while slave morality is the resentment of losers who blame the system for their failures. This interpretation completely misses Nietzsche's point. First, it reduces a complex genealogical analysis to a simple success-failure binary. Second, it assumes that existing hierarchies are natural and good, precisely the kind of assumption Nietzsche would subject to ruthless critique. Most ironically, Peterson's own moral framework exhibits many characteristics of what Nietzsche called slave morality. Peterson's constant emphasis on rules, duties, and traditional authorities, his resentment toward progressive intellectuals, his tendency to define his position primarily in opposition to what he rejects, all of this resembles the reactive, resentment-based morality that Nietzsche associated with the slave mentality. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power is perhaps his most misunderstood idea. It's not simply about domination or success in the conventional sense. The will to power is Nietzsche's term for the fundamental drive that underlies all life, the drive to grow, expand, create, and impose one's interpretation on the world. Importantly, this isn't necessarily about power over others. The highest expression of the will to power is creative self-overcoming, the ability to constantly recreate oneself and one's values. As Nietzsche writes in Beyond Good and Evil, every extension of knowledge arises from making the unconscious conscious, for making the unknown known, for making the chaotic ordered. Peterson transforms this complex metaphysical concept into basic motivational psychology. In his account, the will to power becomes the drive to succeed, to climb hierarchies, to improve oneself according to conventional measures of success. This reduction strips away everything that makes Nietzsche's concept philosophically interesting. Peterson's will to power is something that could be discussed in any business school course on motivation. Nietzsche's will to power is a radical reconceptualization of what drives human existence. The doctrine of eternal recurrence, the idea that we should live as if we would have to repeat our lives exactly, infinitely, is one of Nietzsche's most profound challenges to conventional thinking about meaning and value. It's not meant as a literal cosmological theory, but as a test of how we value our lives. If you had to live your exact life over and over again, with no possibility of change, would you affirm it? This thought experiment forces us to confront whether we truly value our choices or merely endure them while hoping for something better. Peterson treats eternal recurrence as a kind of cognitive behavioral therapy technique. In his interpretation, it becomes advice to live each day as if it matters, or take responsibility for your choices because you'll have to live with the consequences. While this isn't terrible advice, it completely misses the radical nature of Nietzsche's challenge. Peterson's version is compatible with conventional moral frameworks. It's essentially a call to be a more responsible person within existing value systems. Nietzsche's version is a challenge to those value systems themselves. Nietzsche's genealogical method involves tracing the historical development of concepts, values, and institutions to reveal their contingent rather than necessary character. By showing how our most cherished values emerged from particular historical circumstances, Nietzsche opened space for new possibilities. This method is inherently subversive. It takes what appears natural and inevitable and reveals it to be constructed and changeable. The genealogical method is a tool for liberation from the tyranny of tradition. Peterson occasionally uses genealogical insights, but always in service of conservative conclusions. He might trace the historical development of certain progressive ideas to show their contingency, but he treats traditional values as if they were natural and eternal. This selective application of critical thinking reveals Peterson's fundamental dishonesty as a thinker. He's willing to use Nietzschean insights to attack what he dislikes, but not to examine what he wants to preserve. Peterson's misinterpretation of Nietzsche isn't just an academic concern, it has real consequences for how people understand philosophy and intellectual inquiry. When someone with Peterson's platform presents such a distorted version of a major thinker, it misleads thousands of people about what philosophy can offer. More troublingly, Peterson's approach represents a broader trend in popular intellectual culture, the reduction of complex philosophical insights to simple self-help advice. This domestication of philosophy robs it of its critical and transformative potential. Peterson's treatment of Nietzsche reveals a consistent pattern in his intellectual method: take radical thinkers who challenge conventional wisdom and reinterpret them as supporters of conventional wisdom. This allows Peterson to claim the authority of great thinkers while advocating for thoroughly conventional positions. This is not honest intellectual engagement, it's intellectual appropriation. Peterson benefits from association with Nietzsche's reputation while advancing ideas that Nietzsche would have despised. What Peterson has done to Nietzsche amounts to a kind of philosophical crime. He has taken one of the most radical and challenging thinkers in Western philosophy and transformed him into a spokesperson for conventional morality, traditional hierarchies, and conservative values. This isn't simply a matter of differing interpretations. Peterson's Nietzsche is so fundamentally opposed to the actual Nietzsche that it represents a complete inversion of his philosophical project. Where Nietzsche calls for the creation of new values, Peterson calls for the preservation of old ones. Where Nietzsche challenges traditional authorities, Peterson defends them. Where Nietzsche embraces the dangerous freedom that comes with the collapse of traditional certainties, Peterson seeks refuge in familiar comforts. The real tragedy is that Peterson's enormous platform means that many people will encounter Nietzsche through Peterson's distorted lens and never discover the genuinely radical and transformative insights that the actual Nietzsche offers. In trying to make Nietzsche safe for conservative consumption, Peterson has robbed him of everything that makes him philosophically valuable. If Nietzsche were alive today, he would likely view Peterson as a perfect example of the kind of intellectual he spent his career opposing. Someone who uses the language of philosophy to justify conventional prejudices and resist genuine questioning. Peterson's Nietzsche is not a philosopher but a therapist, and not a particularly good one at that. The real Nietzsche remains dangerous, challenging, and essential. Peterson's version is simply another self-help guru in philosopher's clothing. The difference between them is the difference between genuine philosophical inquiry and its conservative simulation, and that difference matters more than Peterson's followers seem to realize.